gonna let me know.
All right, yeah, we're just about to go live.
Well done. Well, sorry, guys.
Okay, and we are live, I believe. Yes. Okay.
Okay,
Myra, you kick us off.
great. Good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for our late start. We had some technical difficulties. Thanks to everybody here for getting that straightened out. Appreciate your patience. Welcome to the November CTE Committee Meeting. We've got a lot of great things to talk about today, but first I want to thank Secretary Anderson for hosting us, and would love to turn it over to you, Brittany.
Oh, no, great. No, thanks. I really appreciate everybody coming out, and welcome to the World Trade Center in Baltimore. As I mentioned, with us there simply located, I always invite everyone out to use our meeting space. It is here for the government, especially for the city, for the state of Maryland, and we'd love to show everybody and show off our city and everything that we have. So welcome. We look forward to a really, really great meeting. So thanks so much, and super thanks to Sarah. Sarah got it all done. Sarah does all the work. So thanks so much. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay, before we get started, Molly, do you want to do roll call?
Yes, absolutely. So the members that are present in the room are Myra Norton and Secretary Anderson. And then virtually we have Matt Holloway, Michael Thomas, Superintendent Wright, Secretary Wu, and I believe that's it, unless there's anyone that I missed virtually. I think there was a phone number. So if there's anyone else, just unmute yourself and say your name.
Okay.
Good,
Thank
think
you
we're
very
good.
Great, we've got a really full agenda today, so I'm just going to give you an overview of what we're planning to discuss. We're going to have a review of the CTE Committee project plan, thanks to Latifa Grant here with us. We're going to hear some updates both on our expert review team work and the work around occupational skills standards. We're also going to hear from our friends at the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center about the Career Preparation Expansion Act report. Very interested in this because obviously key to the work we're doing is being able to measure the outcomes. Otherwise, sort of what's the point? We want to know that whatever we're doing here has the intended outcome down the road. And then finally, we'll talk about the proposal for how we define industry recognized credentials. So with that, why don't we get started? Latifa, I would love to turn it over to you to oh, actually, sorry, I got ahead of myself. Let me remind everybody where we are in terms of the timeline of the work of this committee. Thanks to Molly and team for showing us here where we are. At our last meeting, you may recall we met at the Anne Arundel County, it was hosted by Anne Arundel County Public Schools, and we had the opportunity to tour 2 schools and see what that district is doing in the CTE space. We want to continue that kind of visiting locations around the state, and so as we look to future meetings, we're definitely going to host those in local areas. That really informs our work. I think I know I can say personally, I learned a lot just being in the space and hearing from educators there and folks that are working, day in and day out to provide CTE to our students. And so hearing from a wide range of stakeholders, I think can really help inform the work that we do here. The committee staff has also been talking to district representatives to plan for next year. So more info to come on the specific dates, et cetera, for 2024. But just know that the plan is for us to travel and visit different locations around the state. Right now, the plan is to meet on a quarterly basis. So we're planning to have 4 quarterly meetings in 2024. But I want to underscore we will likely have some subgroup working group meetings in between. There is a lot to get done between now and the end of next year. All right, and now to kick off our meeting, I'd like to welcome Latifa Durant, our strategic facilitator, and she is going to take us through the committee project plan for the work that we're anticipating.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Leticia Durant. I'm a strategic facilitator supporting the CTE committee and the CTE committee staff. I want to commend you all on the great work that you have done over the past year. And it was a great opportunity to sit down with the CTE staff and review not only the blueprint, but also the implementation plan for the CTE committee. What we did was, there's a lot in there. Let's just be very frank and honest. But if everything is important, then nothing is important. And so we needed to really focus our efforts to determine what is it that the committee is going to achieve during this year. And so we've laid out a blueprint for essentially like a project plan that we're going to follow for those quarterly meetings. And as Sherwin has already mentioned, you're ready to roll up your sleeves and dig in, because although the meetings will move from monthly to quarterly, we will be doing work in between. And so we will be contacting all of the committee members in terms of where they would like to support in the committees, the subcommittees that they would like to serve on. Just to start, the very first area of the committee's deliverables are going to be to provide foundational guidance to stakeholders, right? This thing that we're building, you have to build it on a firm foundation. And so we're doing some of that work today when you all are going to talk about the industry recognized credential, the definition and the criteria. That is a part of that foundation that's needed. There's going to be other foundational information that decisions that we'll have to make. So while there's a lot of information in the blueprint and in the implementation plan, what LEAs, with stakeholders, what others are looking for from the committee is clarity. And so part of the role of the committee will be providing that clarity for stakeholders so that they understand what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, and how they can make good on the promises in the blueprint. So you'll get to start some of that work today. So congratulations. You can check one thing off around foundational, but that foundational work is going to happen throughout the year. The next thing we're going to do now that we've got the foundation is kind of build a framework. All of this work is going to be housed under the career and technical education framework. So that work will be kicking off in the new year. We'll certainly have a committee that's focused on that work to make sure that will be the framework by which all the other work will be guided. So we will certainly be looking at best practices, models from around the country, around the world, to figure out how can we create a best-in-class CTE system for the state of Maryland. The third thing we're going to work on this year is developing our Skills Standards Advisory Committee. As you already know, that has been a mandate under the CTE committee. That group has not yet been stood up. And so we're going to be taking some time this year to develop what the processes are going to be for that committee, what the role will be, and most importantly, who the members of that committee will be to carry the work forward. Also, you'll hear a little bit later today, our fourth priority, which is the ERT, the Expert Review Team. And so you'll hear a little bit more about that deployment strategy. As you can see, that work has already begun, and we will be continuing that into the spring and ongoing from there. And John will have an update for you later today. The fifth item, our fifth priority, is developing annual goals. So everyone knows about the 45% goal by 2030. The question is not only how are we going to get there, but what are the benchmarks along the way to make sure that we get there on time. And so we're going to be working as a committee to get feedback from stakeholders to determine what counts to meet the 45% goal. We're going to be figuring out how do we make sure that we actually collect the data and analyze the data. Because this is a new area for everyone. And so we want to make sure that we have the systems in place, the processes in place, the technology in place to make sure that we are calculating and monitoring and reporting on that goal in a secure way. Number 6 is working on aligning the CTE committee and the Perkins State Plan. There's already been some conversations already, and we'll be working closely with Secretary Wright and her team to make sure that the CTE committee is not only informed of the work in the Perkins Plan, but has the integral role in the development of the plan as well. Number 7, accountability reports. We got lots of reports to do. And so we will be working with the AIB and working with all of you to make sure that we are submitting our reports in full and on time with all of the necessary and required information. And then the 8th and final, not really final, but in terms of our focus for this year, is our career counseling implementation. As you may already be aware, there have been contractors that have been hired to work on that implementation plan, and the team is already working and meeting regularly with the team to make sure that that career counseling plan is being developed and the implementation thereof. but we will be focusing on that in earnest this year as well. So those are the 8 things. If you didn't think that was enough, my question for the committee is also, what's missing? I guess 2 questions. One is, what are your initial reflections on these 8 priorities? And secondly, is there anything that is top of mind for you that you didn't see listed or included in the outline?
Pretty comprehensive, I would have to say, and a lot to get done in a year. And I just want to say, to you, I appreciate your leadership and helping us to get our act together and think really carefully about how we actually move this work forward in an accelerated fashion. Other committee members?
Can you go back 1 slide, please? So I guess what I'm looking for is last time we met in person, we talked, oh, this is Michael Thomas, by the way, sorry.
Hey,
How's
Mike.
everybody? So the last time we talked about defining roles. Where would that fit in?
So the framework is what's going to help us to define the roles in terms of what agencies, what departments are going to take responsibility for which pieces of the planning process. And then also that'll be some of the work of the subcommittees as well to help to flesh that out for each of the various deliverables.
Yeah, and it should be like the roles of the K-12, the roles of the community college, the role of partners. Okay, all right. Just wanted to make sure we were covering it. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right.
And that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that has to be in the CTE framework. That's part of what we're tasked to do there. So that will be an integral part of that deliverable. Good question.
Great, thank you.
A quick thought. I think Secretary Wu is on as well. Portia, are you on? Can you hear?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Can you? I
I
lost the video somehow, so I can't see who's where. But
can't see us. Oh.
We see you.
okay, good, because I can't see you. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in the bunker in Annapolis. So.
I'll be right next to her now. But yeah, I just wanted to comment just to make sure that the committee and the reason why I offered to say hello to Secretary Wu. So we have a lot of moving parts, around in terms of workforce development, career technical education, apprenticeships, just to make sure everybody's familiar with everything in our entire workforce ecosystem, and we're kind of matching up outcomes and helping them line up all of the stuff that we're thinking about. That's all. That's just one concern. I think we've been going around the state and really looking at all the great assets that we have and so many big opportunities. And workforce is just a really, really important part of it, especially with the gaps and goals that we have to fill. And even as a big dot connecting operation, as I call it, in terms of what we do in economic development, it's just really, really important. I'm starting to see that we really get the pieces and the pillars to make sure we get them connected as well. So that's just the thought I wanted to make sure, because again, we aren't at a loss for opportunities and thinking and structure. It's a big way of kind of really just combining and making sure we keep the chess pieces in place so we can get to the outcome. So.
Absolutely. And if I may, I completely agree. And I think the CTE framework is an important opportunity for this committee to help the state do that when it comes to some opportunities we're providing specifically for young people and students. And we think more broadly for the entire workforce outside of that. I'm glad you brought this up, because one thing not on this deliverable timeline, but something that is deliverable of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, which this committee is a part, is our 4-year state workforce plan that is meant to be that more comprehensive piece. And so we also want to see the core elements of this framework and the work that this committee is taking on reflected and kind of have those dots connected through that plan and use that as one opportunity to be showing kind of what are all the things that we're already doing and where do we need to be plugging into that. So I'm really like you're all but glad you're part of that process. Yeah.
Well, and if I might chime in, now I can see you guys suddenly. Thank you, Secretary Anderson. And I think, of course, not only in those deliverables that we just talked about, but the broader work of the committee and the board, the engagement of employers and making sure the employer community understands where we're going with some of these milestones and definitions is absolutely critical, because they will be a huge part of achieving success. So
Any other comments or anything that we're missing? Okay, great. Well, yeah.
Let me just briefly, I do want to just say from the staff perspective, I just want to reiterate the thanks to Latifa for her work as our strategic facilitator and kind of helping us kind of take a step back from the plan and the kind of all the steps that were laid out for us in a short time frame with limited resources and really being able to help us think strategically and leveraging her personal experience in some of this work to think about the best sequencing we could take on as a committee. So thank you. We're excited to also leverage your expertise in some of these specific deliverables coming up. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I know this team can do it. And I also want to thank the AIB for supporting us in having worked with the team.
Great. All right. So next on the agenda, I'm happy to have John Strickland here. He's our expert review team manager, and he's going to share some of the work that he's been doing, visiting different parts of the state and working, really kind of developing what that plan might look like.
Yeah, thank you. Madam Chair of the Health. This is So I'm John Strickland, as it says on the slide, I'm the expert review team manager. I started this job in July. And so before that, I spent most of my adult life in schools, teaching. I was an instructional coach for a little while, mostly middle school. I taught kindergarten for a couple of years, taught some pre-K. That was interesting, but I was younger then, so it's okay. I most recently an assistant principal in Talbot County. And so, this work, from my standpoint, a lot of it is figuring out like where the schools are and where our CTE directors are and where our districts are. Because I think that's the important piece of this is making sure that we are all included in it and we all work together because, I started in July and a couple of weeks after I started, I reached out to all the LEAs and I was like, I just want to talk and I just want to have a conversation just to see who you are. So you know who I am, so you can hear my voice, you can hear my country bumpkin accent and see if you want to talk and we can have a conversation just about, the state of CTE with you. What does it look like? Because I live on the Eastern Shore. I worked on the Eastern Shore. I know what it looks like there, but I would love to see what it looks like everywhere else. And so, so what I did is I set up some conversations with them over Google Meets and Zooms. And I've met now with 23 of the 24. One of them, we got our wires crossed and we're going to set it up. But I have talked to all of them. And I just wanted to throw out there just as an extra piece here that like the conversations were super inspiring to me just because like I'm so used to being in a school all day long and seeing kids all day long and dealing with discipline all day long or doing cafeteria duty or something like that stepping out and walking into other schools and seeing what great things are happening around this state. It made me feel so good about this work and that this work is powerful, but we also have people that are ready to do it. And I think that's the biggest piece that I took away was the people that I've spoken with and the people that I've talked to, they want what's best for kids. And that's really what we're doing here as a group. It's like, they're really what our focus is. Like, what are we doing for them? So with that said, I've also started about mid-September, I reached back out to them and I decided I wanted to go out and go to them and talk to them in person. And so I have visited 12 LEAs so far since September. Started with the bottom of the Eastern Shore and I worked my way up and came over to Anne Arundel and also Charles and over that way too. So, and again, the visits that I wanted to do were not from a formal aspect. It was me, let's just have a conversation, walk me around, let me feel what's going on here because the conversations over the internet are great, but the conversations together are even more important. So there was some of them, it was just me and the CTE director and we walked around and some of them it was me, principal, CTE director, coordinators, teachers, and we walked around and did things. So, it was informal, but from a school standpoint, I remember just wanting people to see what we're up to and people didn't come. And so it was just a way for us to go in and see and let people showcase what they're doing in their schools and how we can help. Now we can push that forward and help them grow. So these are the three things that I really pulled from those conversations so far, is that we're working with a passionate group of people, which is a plus, and that puts us already closer to the finish line. There's a committed group of people, and they want to engage in the work. They want what's best for kids. They want what's best for their staff. They want what's best for schools, the communities, and workforce. So those are the things that I pulled from our meeting so far. I think part of this work too is making sure that when I go places, I can come back and I can say, while I was there, here are some of the things that I saw. Because I think that the most important piece for us is to know what's happening, but also that the schools and the LEAs know we're going to talk about them too. Because that's the work that we're doing great things. I want people to know too, and it's hard to know if you're not there. I don't know if it's either I'm very easily impressed or these are really cool things, but I just want to throw some informal things out there that I saw in a couple visits recently that I think are really cool. And no, they don't really, it's not part of the IRC conversation. It's not part of it, but it's just something just so we know that there's things happening out there that are great, that with people that want to build on things, and they're and they just want to work towards what we're working towards. So 2 weeks ago, I went to North Point High School, which is Charles County. It's in Waldorf. My parents live in North Carolina, so I've been through Waldorf on like 301, but I haven't been to Waldorf. So I went to North Point High School. I met with Rebecca, who is the CTE director for Charles County, and we walked through North Point High School. I equated it to like Bayside High from like Saved by the Bell. That's why I felt, because on the Eastern Shore, our schools aren't that big. So when I walked in, they have a pool in the school. I didn't know they have a pool in school still, but they have a pool. That might be a thing, but to me, it was like, oh my God, they have a pool. But we walked around. She took me to the CNA medical professional piece. We went to the early childhood area where they had daycare going on and childcare going on. And I talked to those little kids, and those little pumpkins are just so little. I have a 7 and 4-year-old, so I can say that. But they're just asking me, like, all the kids always think I'm 70 for some reason. It has to be my hair. But it's been like that since I was like 30. But these little kids, these little 3 and 4-year-olds, just sitting there eating lunch and being able to walk around and just see what's going on. And but we went into culinary, and it's Chef Willis is his name. And we walked in, they had a demo. They were having a demo piece, and they had a special guest, and they had the camera above it, and he was doing some sort of macaron or macaron, whatever I don't know the difference sometimes, but macaron. He was doing that, the kids were doing that, and then there were some kids that were cooking and setting things up. And we walked through a multi-purpose area, and we walked into what I thought was a teacher's lounge. And I walk in, and it's set up just like a regular teacher's lounge. But there's also kids in there running a business. And I hadn't seen that. And so while I was in there, they have a grab and go set up for staff. And so at lunchtime, instead of going to the cafeteria or instead of bringing something from home, they walk in, the kids are running the store. They call it Wawa. I don't know if I can trademark call that Wawa, but it was a grab and go. And they had drinks, and they had sandwiches wrapped up, and they had soups, and they had desserts. Teacher walked in, staff walked in, this is what I want, or they placed the order before, they came in and grabbed it and just took it and went. One of the teachers came and got like a 32-ounce thing of soup and took it home for the night. They were going to share it with family too. But that money goes right back into the program. They're buying new mixers, they're buying things for the kitchen. He also has just met with the school district, and they are at the end of converting a bus into a food bus. And so one of their decommissioned school buses, they are now turning it into a food truck. And that's what they're going to be doing with that. And so they're going to be going to small events, medium events, school events, community events, and going and cooking for the community. I think that's crazy cool. Like, I think that's a great thing. But also showing kids the business side of things, showing when you're in the black and showing when you're in the red and figuring out what that looks like. I think that's great. And like a spot for teachers to go to know that the kids that they teach are right here serving them and doing what they need to do to get what I loved it. I think it was great. So I wanted to make sure that I spotlighted that, number one. Number two, a few weeks ago, I went to Harford County. And I went to North Harford High School. That was Joe Connolly as the CTE director. We got to North Harford High. They have the Natural Resources Ag Science Magnet Program. Walk in, big school. It looked great, clean. Teachers walked us around. It was great. We go into the hydroponics place. Now, Here's the thing, okay, so we were walking around, I don't know if this is true or not, so if you have any water experience, but they said in this one spot, they were growing oysters on the gills of fish, like baby oysters, like now it might not be a thing, I might have dreamed that, and if I did, don't nobody take it, but they apparently, they were doing it, like that's what they do at the school, like that's a huge thing. Because we have to think about that when it comes to expert review team, when it comes to blanketing what credentials count. Because sometimes we go to places and they need a credential in hydroponics, or they need a credential in ag studies that some places don't need. But we have to really start thinking about that when it comes to high demand and what we want these kids to do after high school. But while I was there, I walked outside and they took us out, and there's 2 barns out there. Didn't know that. And they have like acres of land. Anybody know that? Y'all know that? Okay, I didn't. So, but I don't live up here. So we walk out and we go to this barn, right? First of all, there's a sheep just looking right at me. So some animals are like super like unpredictable. I'm not really cool with that. I have dogs, but I'm a sheep. But they were looking right at me. So I'll go out there and there's a sheep just hanging out. We go in the barn. They have 2 sheep, alpacas, horses, cow, and rabbits, and a barn cat. Okay, so we're walking around in this barn, right? And I told this story like for 3 weeks. I was telling everybody this story. And there's a cow in there. I forgot the name. But it has a cannula. You know what cannula is? I didn't either. It's a port, and it's in its side, and it goes to its stomach. Okay, so what it does is it allows for the students to do their research about the digestion in the cow. The healthy cow, regular old cow, but because of its health and things like that, they were like, we can use this for research. Cow's just regular, walking around, big old hole in the side with a lid on it. The kids go in there, they feed them whatever, corn, hay, whatever cows eat, I don't mean that. And they can watch it being digested while they're standing there. Also reach in and pull things out for research. They said the cow also saved another 100 and some odd lives because the digestive stuff in there is used by the vets. They come and get it and take it back, and they use that as medication for animals that are also dealing with some digestion issues. I didn't know any of that. But these things are happening in a school. Like these kids are 16, 17, 18 years old, and they're doing this. There was pigs in there. They've been artificially inseminated by the students, and they're going to give birth in January-ish, and they're going to help with the birthing of these piglets. Like that's awesome. And that's something that's specific to Harford County maybe, but that's something to really keep in mind about. We have to remember that there's kids in different places that need different things, and we got to make sure we set them up for that. So those are just couple highlights I just want to throw out there just informally as possible. But I also want to talk about spring 24. We're working on doing some mock visits. And our thoughts are for those mock visits that we're going to do 2 of them. One of them is we kind of want to do more of a large district and go in and check out like a tech center or something like that, just to get an idea of what that might look like. And then another visit that might be more of a small district, rural district, maybe with no tech center, so we can kind of see what that looks like, because we run the gambit on what type of schools we have. And again, when we go in as an expert review team, something we need to think about is not all schools are the same and not all districts are set up the same. So we have to think about what's best for them, what's most efficient, and what's most effective for the kids. So that's what our thoughts are in that. We're going to try to do it between February and April. April starts some testing windows for state testing, so we don't want to mess that up. But between that time, and then those are some possible people that might be involved in it. So if you are on the committee and you're interested in maybe taking part in those, just reach out. And once we get those ironed out, we can let you know what we're doing, and then we can have you visit with us. Cool. Okay. And then we also are doing work. And this work has been we do the work with NCEE, which is the National Center for Education Education in the Economy. It's in there. It's Central Council, one or the other. But anyway, Jackie and Charlotte, we love them. But we've been working with them to come up with the tools that we need to go into schools pre-visit to get the information, to gather all the data we need about the school. during visit, just the reports and capture sheets that we need when we go to the schools, and then post visit. What are the reports going to look like when we turn those in? Because we want to get that information that's really usable. So we're thinking that starting next school year, our thoughts right now, until we get some feedback on that, is we use year one to just go to as many LEAs as we can. We go to the district, we do a district visit. They take us to where we need to go. We do a day of it. And then we just kind of see what it looks like there. We take the data, we use the tools, we modify and adapt the tools for the next visit. But we thought doing that makes more sense than going to individual schools and trying to see what they do, because as far as I'm concerned, and from what I've spoken about, CTE is more of a program thing. It's more of a district thing. It's more of an LEA thing. It's not really a school thing. So we're going to try to do it that way so we can go into LEAs as a whole and get them to take us into where we need to go so we can get some reporting, just some baseline information that first year. So that's the thought right now. And that all depends on funding and budget, just does. We're planning on there being more of me, but I don't know if that would happen. We're planning on it though. So if it does, great. If it doesn't, we will, make an adaptation. But I just, I want to put out there into the universe that I am super appreciative of the opportunity to get out here and do this. Like, this is something that I want to do. One of my core values for my engagement coaching classes is that is connection. And I missed out about being an assistant principal. I love my connection with the kids and with the adults and with the parents and whoever, but this is giving me that chance while trying something new. So I just want to put that out there in the universe that I'm having a great time. So I hope that's okay, because you have a great time. But I just want to put that out there that that's what we're working on for the future. So that's all. So I think I talked too much.
Okay. Any questions for John? I definitely love I think we should, I know we're working on budget and gonna figure all that out. But getting a baseline across all 24 LEAs would be ideal, because that's just gonna enable us to understand where to focus, where and how. And so certainly agree with that.
And so I know I couldn't agree more, and I'm really looking forward to the kind of this coming spring, doing some of those pilot visits you talked about briefly, to kind of make sure that this plan, this model is right, that the tools are working, so that we can really maximize this opportunity in the next school year to get that kind of information for the years to follow. So thank you, John. Thank you for kind of painting a picture for us of some of the great things that you've seen. I know, as Myra mentioned in her opening, some of that, and really seeing some of the great things going on is really informative. So thank you for sharing.
And I think Secretary Louise, your hand up.
Yes. Sorry, I don't know why you guys keep appearing and disappearing in video. So I'm not sure what you can do, but one thing just as a follow on, I think visits are great, but I think one of the things we really lack is that cross district look, because each of the districts is, getting their own information. So I think this is also a great opportunity to figure out in a more comprehensive way what's going on with, a lot of the issues the committee is concerned with who's doing what on the career counseling, who's doing what on some of the, pathways to apprenticeship, what common barriers are we seeing, what other issues are there. So I want to urge us to try to be quantitative as well as qualitative. And I don't know if that's in your remit specifically, John, or just as we're thinking of that. I think visits are great, but they can take up a ton of time, and making sure we have distilled down information that's actionable for the committee seems to be the highest priority for me.
Okay, and I just want to acknowledge, I know we're having some technical difficulties with.
Thanks. I'm not, all I see now is my face, a really big thing on my screen, so I'm not sure what to do. But we can hear you just fine. We hear you just fine.
Good. Yeah, the camera keeps disconnecting, so we keep trying to reconnect, and we'll continue to keep trying to do that. But for anyone around the table, if you're speaking, maybe just announce yourself so that viewers know who's speaking.
Great. Okay. So next up, we're always glad to have Bob Lehrman with us from the Urban Institute, and he's going to share an update on the work they're doing on occupational skills.
Okay, well, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. First, I'd like to just say something about the concept. Many times, we have some confusion between industry and occupation, and these would be mainly occupation centered that can oftentimes be in a variety of industries. And the overall concept is that we've sort of learned through our Urban Institute work over the years is to really examine first what do you want at the end? What are the key job functions you want the person who follows on these skill standards is able to perform? What are the key functions in the occupation to be able to perform at a very high level? And then once you establish those functions, you can then turn to what are the competencies you need to perform these functions. And that would include both technical competencies that are occupation specific, generic skills, employability skills, which are always relevant. The second point as an introduction is that it's important to link these standards to applications. There have been efforts in the past, both here in the US with the National Skill Standards Board and with the UK system that did not work because they just put out these standards without having any delivery system for how these standards were going to be used. So our focus is really on how these standards are going to be used, especially in meeting the apprenticeship goals that are laid out in the blueprint. So, under the recommendations, the workforce board staff, we've done the following. We've developed information on occupations, especially those not requiring a BA degree, but requiring more than a high school diploma, at least in terms of training on the job or added education. And we're looking at those occupations that are projected to yield the highest number of job openings in Maryland over the next 8 years. And we've begun ranking these occupations. We do have a separate list for the BA related occupations because some of the apprenticeships will be for occupations that typically require a BA, including things like accounting and even the teacher apprenticeships. And then we've looked at whether there are existing CTE courses relevant to these occupations that could be in an apprenticeship context used for what's called RTI, related technical instruction. And then once we've established those lists and looked at where there are overlaps with CTE courses, we wanted to begin with those kinds of occupations because those would probably be the easiest to begin achieving apprenticeships for. And so then for those occupations, we've begun looking at skill standards. And those skill standards come from a variety of sources. They include the competency-based standards undertaken by Urban Institute. We have actually had 2 phases that have been funded by the Labor Department. So we have something like 60 to 80 occupational standards that are very well developed and vetted with a number of employers. And I think that's sort of the gold standard for skill standards that are related to registered apprenticeship. But in addition, we have other sources. One excellent source, again, that was really developed through the Urban Institute work is something called apprenticeshipstandards.org. And that allows you to enter in an occupation name, and out will come what apprenticeship standards there are in those occupations. Sometimes there's several, sometimes there's only one or two, but we would use that to look at the ones that seem most comprehensive. Now, the final look where neither of those work well would be to turn to ONET, which has a whole list, very, very long lists of standards that are, basically for data analysis, and they haven't really been used as much in the skill standards world, but we would certainly draw upon those as starting points. So that's what we've done so far, and be happy to take questions or comments.
And I'll just jump in real quick, Bob, to piggyback on what you're saying. So just as a reminder for the blueprint, this Skill Standards Advisory Committee is required. And basically they'll be, the point is that for them to analyze and provide and make recommendations to the CTE committee on what would be strong occupational standards necessary for a CTE system. And so really these occupational frameworks, will go into what are the skills required in order to be competent in this career? What are the credentials that align to this occupation? And so there's going to be a lot of crossover, obviously, as we define industry recognized credentials. And really the intent is that, anyone can look at this and understand. So the student can look at it and say, okay, this is what I need to do to be competent and a master at this career. A CTE instructor can use it and align their curriculum and what they're teaching to the skills that are required within that occupation. And then of course, an employer can look at it and work with the school district on, okay, what is going to be on the job training? What are the skills that we're going to learn on the job? And what is the related technical instruction that the school system is going to provide? And how do those skills match up? So that's really what the intent and purpose of this committee is. And just so you all know, the intent of what we've pulled here and this list and the potential frameworks is really something to present to the Skill Standards Advisory Committee once they are established. As you all know, we have made a budget request for several different areas, but one area is that this committee is going to need to be staffed. This is a lot of work, and especially if you start looking at beyond the 10 frameworks. I mean, there's going to be frameworks over time, and there's going to be lists over time. Do we want to look at what are the career projections 10 years from now and so forth? So there's different ways that you can pull what are the frameworks we should prioritize on. And so this is really just an initial set to have something to present to this committee once established. And at this point, we have made that budget request, and we are in the process of answering questions to the Department of Bureau Management. So we'll post it on that. But that's kind of where we're at. So everything's going to be a little bit on hold until we know a little bit more about how we can staff this committee funding wise.
I'd like to add one thing, which is that in the context of meeting the apprenticeship goals, we want to make it as easy as possible for employers to register their programs. And if the skill standards established through this process can also be coordinated with the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council, that could streamline the effort. Almost all countries that have robust apprenticeship programs, and I'm talking especially about those countries where the apprentices start at age 17, 16, 18, all those countries do have skill standards that guide the apprenticeships. And so this is another rationale for developing these skill standards that can be used in the apprenticeship context.
Great point. Other questions?
So I think this goes to both conversations.
And just, I'm just gonna say, this is Sarah.
Sarah
Just-
Shepherd,
yeah,
sorry. Forgot about the video. Yes, so I think two concerns really. One concern is that, and I saw here the worry that Project Lead the Way could be discontinued because it doesn't have an actual industry recognized credential. And a lot of these have to have credentials for part of the blueprint framework. Unfortunately, a lot of our industries that we have, especially when it revolves around biotechnology, they don't have industry recognized credentials. Cybersecurity, for instance, is not even a recognized field. It doesn't have a code with the federal government. So how do we work around that? Because these are valuable, these are high paying jobs in industries that we should be trying to get our kids into the pipeline and be more flexible in these conversations. I know that we can't tackle everything right now, but I just have a major concern with how it's currently laid out, having these credentials when there's nothing to credential. I mean, there are skill standards that we can work through, and the industries have come together to say these are our core competencies that we need, but can't get credentialed in certain pieces. So even like cybersecurity, you can do Python, and there's pieces for that too. But I think where we're going with a lot of these industries and a lot of things that are going to happen aside from the trades and what we're seeing with AI and just everything else developing, we have to really look towards the future of how, and even maybe work with the legislature to figure out how we can still meet these standards without giving our children the best leg forward and not putting them in a box. I think that's going to be huge and valuable. I think the other piece though is when we're looking at these and the baselines and we're looking at the LEAs, how does that work when it comes to the counties are all independent of each other. They have guidance and oversight, but they've always ran differently. They don't have to do things exactly the same way. So I just think that we have a good luck.
That's exactly what you have to do. Okay, keep going.
But it's just, I think this is a huge lift and something that we've all thought about, but we've got to figure out how this is going. We're trying to put a square peg in a round hole right now based on what our guidance is. And we need to figure out how we can, as a group, go back and say, we've got to make that hole a little bit bigger to fit that square peg.
And so if I could, Madam Chair, if I could just help with Sarah, I was expressing what everybody will be in economic development every day, kind of making sure we weave that thread through all of the challenging opportunities, all of the great designers, all of the many industries, with everybody looking and kind of have a conversation, I need an apprenticeship program, I need a workforce, I got 35%, turnover year, no matter what that number might be. We're coming back, Secretary who knows we're at 1.6 unemployment, the lowest in the country, and where we're going to get the people from, we're connecting it all. And I think part of it, what Sarah expressed, is that most of the industry
Did anyone else lose the audio in the room?
Hey, I lost it.
Oh, geez. Let's chat
Yeah,
them.
we've lost it.
Yeah,
Oh, geez.
I just chatted
Yeah.
someone else who I know is in the
Okay.
room, but not like has her cell phone. Like, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh, geez.
Hey, y'all, this is Richard. I just texted Molly and John.
Holly is messaging us. Oh, geez.
Anyway, Portia, I want to, can you hear me?
Hey, yes.
I want them to realize that completing an apprenticeship gives you a credential, a valued
Right. I
credential.
mean, that is a credential, but also I was confused by the comment on, oh, are you guys back?
Yes.
Are we back?
Yeah, I think you guys are, stayed live streaming.
I don't want to interrupt you guys who are in the middle of a conversation.
Oh, I actually, if I was saying apprenticeship is a credential, I think my comment was going to be, or just a question of, I think someone in the room made the example of cybersecurity. And I think that's a good example of actually where there's been a huge amount of federal effort and has been a really, detailed skills to
Right.
credentials to positions mapping that exists already in the federal level. So I would certainly say we should not do that because, a ton of money has been poured into that. It's been done at the federal government level. But that's an example of in those emerging fields that it takes a lot of investment and work to identify and map skills standards and have it updated constantly in a way. So, I mean, I just think as we undertake this work, trying to understand what's useful or maybe takes advantage of existing or other investments and maybe just connects them to other institutions in Maryland. I've always felt this is a difficult area of work because it is so investment and labor intensive and it's constantly moving.
Yeah, I want to reinforce that if I could. We at Urban, and that's why I talked about using existing standards, not developing them out of whole cloth. That takes a huge amount of time and effort. We're putting in that effort, as I say, at Urban under a contract with the Labor Department with actual money. But the other point I want to make is that completing an apprenticeship is definitely a credential and a valued credential. And in a lot of these fields, there are some very good standards. They're sometimes called work process schedules in the apprenticeship world, but they do lay out what is required, and certainly with a range of employers are actually using it. And again, they might not be perfect, but they're very good starting points. And I think they're relevant to the task at hand. I don't know. Did we lose them again?
Yeah, their audio dropped again. I think they're back.
God.
Our Wi-Fi is cutting out.
Oh.
We're all developing our patience today. We're gonna do some deep breathing exercise. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, Secretary Lou and Bob, this is Sarah Shepherd from Commerce. The one thing that we were saying before it got dropped, well, I was saying, was not creating these skills and standards. I agree that there's already been extensive work. I think the concern more so, especially, in the field of bio, is the lack of industry recognized credentials. The fact that it necessarily can't have industry recognized credentials. There can be skills standards that if they've already said these are what we need, but it's a matter of the way it's currently put together. It's going to be a disservice to our students and our employers for how the language is written about meeting a credential. And that same thing kind of goes with Project Lead the Way and the worries that the schools have with having to have a credential, that program is going to be dropped, even though it's a great program. So that's just sort of the things to think about in the future. They're not going to be solved today, but.
Yeah, I do think that's clarity in the definition, because I don't I don't necessarily agree that there aren't industry recognized credentials in emerging fields. They may just not look as established, maybe different indicia than what we have in some of our very established fields. It's not going to be the same.
Well, I'm just saying that I know that we don't have, for like our life science advisory board has been working to put together, it's not an official credential, but they have standards that would work to become a credential. It's just that we don't have an actual, there's no industry recognized credential.
No, I'm.
Well-
I don't know that that's true. I think that's the announcement isn't that the
Yeah, but-
announcement was made at the hub? Or maybe I'm wrong, but we can take it offline. I think there's definitely work to be done there for sure.
I think this is a good area of exploration, because also I think that's to two things that we're going to be discussing, one in this meeting and then another, I think, in a future public meeting. How we define industry recognized credentials, right? And making sure that piece, that we get that right and kind of incorporate some of those less established ones, if they're demonstrating the right things for the criteria. And we'll talk more about our draft of that soon. I think you're also talking about the kind of blueprint 45% goal, and there is a difference between what counts toward the goal and what can still be supported perhaps outside the goal. However, we also want that goal to reflect all these types of opportunities we're trying to line up for students. And so I know as we think about what the committee believes, should be part of that goal, is worthy of being part of that goal. We're focused on apprenticeship first and foremost, credentials of value, certainly. I think that the definitional conversations we'll be having in the next couple of months would be a good place to explore some of this too.
And I think that kind of goes in hand with when you're getting a high school and how their it's about four-year college and changing that narrative as well. This is what the blueprint's working towards for just Maryland, but we truly have to incorporate these pieces too that may not have been thought of when it was first developed.
Just one quick point, in the apprenticeship world, I mean, these standards that could be developed, that could be broad-based, are not necessarily all that an employer would require. He can add on. So it provides a very strong base. And our experience in recruiting employers is that when you show them all the things that the apprentice will be able to accomplish after completing the apprenticeship, that piques their interest. And that actually is one way of helping sell employers on apprenticeship.
Yeah, absolutely. And ensuring that the apprenticeship programs are producing high quality workers. So their needs we're solving a need on both sides of the equation. Employers need employees, but they need workers, they need skilled, and our students, we want them to have a path to economic mobility and to quality jobs. And so I think that's what we all are and how we go about it, yes, it's complicated, but I'll say more about this later. And I think this next section really is kind of underscoring some of the things I personally have been reflecting on, which is that we really have to start from a place of, you said this earlier, Secretary Anderson, what are the outcomes that we are looking to deliver? And I know we talk a lot about the 45% goal in 2030, and I know that that's a big thing. I just want to ask us to I personally feel that it's more important we get the outcomes right and figure out what are the right mechanisms to achieve those outcomes. And maybe we have to move the goal, maybe we have to adjust the timeline rather than let's, do a bunch of stuff so we can hit this 45% goal and our students don't have the outcomes that they need and our employers don't have the workforce that they need. And then what have we been doing? So, I just, that's something that's been on my mind a lot as we do this work. And I understand the anxiety, to be quite blunt about it, but so many stakeholders have around this, because anytime you put a goal in front, and I want to give us a little bit of breathing room to say, let's get the outcomes right that we're trying to achieve, and then we can figure all the other stuff out. Let's not sacrifice the quality of the outcome. So, and to that end, I'm very happy to introduce Ann Kellogg and Ross Goldstein. Okay, want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Ross. From the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, and they're going to talk to us about their Career Preparation Expansion Act report, which looks at outcomes for high school students 5 years after graduation. So you can see why this is top of mind for me. And I think we should really, as they go through this presentation, think about this is going to be critical for us as a committee, and not just for this committee, but to your point, Secretary Anderson, for the work across the state in terms of workforce and how we better serve employers, all of that. It's going to be how we data. How do we measure? Are the things we're doing leading to the outcomes that we see? So really excited to have you guys here today, and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome, thanks. Happy to be here with you all today. I just have a few brief slides. I'll just go through them, and then after that, happy to take any and all questions, whether it's about the center generally or about the Career Preparation Expansion Act, CTE education. I recognize a number of names on the screen. Unfortunately, I can't quite see the people in the room, so there may be some people in the room that I also know, but we thought or suspected perhaps there might be many people not familiar with us. So 2 quick slides just to give you what normally is a 30-minute conversation about what we do in a nutshell. The Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center is an independent state agency. We were established in state law in 2010, so we are our own agency. Our mission is to integrate data from other state agencies primarily and link them together to help policymakers make informed decisions. So we are not a policymaking agency. We provide data and analysis to agencies who are. Next slide. And this is, as we call it, our colorful wheel of data. Just to give you a quick snapshot of the data that we presently have in this system, we have MOUs with the Maryland Higher Education Commission, the Maryland State Department of Education, the Department of Juvenile Services, Department of Labor, Department of Human Services, and we're working with a number of the health occupation boards to bring together data in our system where we can link these together to study the education and workforce outcomes of Marylanders. So we have a very rich data set with our data extending from 2008 to present, which present given lags is around 2002 to early 03 records, right? Because most of our data are lagged about a year. But through this, we're able to develop any number of reports, some of which are required for us to produce, some of which are required for various state agencies to produce, that we provide analysis in data tables to support. Next slide. So one of those is tied to your all interests in really 2 ways. The Career Preparation Expansion Act did 2 things for the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center that will probably be of interest to this group. The first is it required us to begin collecting data around different credentials related to the labor market. So industry certifications, for which we've begun bringing in Microsoft certification data, apprenticeship data, which we have been bringing in for a few years now. Through our partnership with the Maryland Higher Education Commission, they have developed a new set of collections around workforce development sequence completions. To your earlier conversations about there are credentials of interest that maybe don't have exact credential names. These are those. They are targeted workforce outcomes. Those data come in, as well as related data to WIOA reporting from the Department of Labor. And we are actively working on bringing in a number of business and occupation licenses. There are numerous boards in Maryland that we have to work with independently to collect those data. We've begun with the nursing board as one that was of key interest to state policy over the last year, but we will continue to expand our data collection to bring these license data into our system to link to education records. Next slide. The second part of interest here is that the Act required us to partner with the Governor's Workforce Development Board, and specifically called out that we needed to produce a report on high school graduates 5 years after graduation. it asks us to look at 3 things, of which we really can only do 2. We do not have data on the hours worked per week, but because we have data from Maryland State Department of Education and the Maryland Department of Labor, we're able to look at high school graduates and the wages that they earn and the labor sectors that they're in. But that's kind of not, we don't kind of stop there, right? The 5-year period after graduation, I probably don't have to tell all of you, is a period where many students are pursuing college. And so we actually work with this report to integrate our post-secondary data so we can look separately at individuals who continue on to college from those who don't. The report, which we will have posted this year really very shortly, it's due December 1st, so it's about to be hot off the press, is our 6th reporting year. Each year when we've produced this report, we've taken some special requests to look at certain things. We've had requests to look at and dive into some college more, people who don't finish. We've had requests to look at specific labor sectors. So we've dug deeper in that. And of interest to this group today, I will share a couple of slides from when we worked on the career. We added some data points around career in technical education. Secretary Wu, do you have a question for me?
Yeah, maybe, and I apologize. I know I'm on MLDS, so I should know more about this, but I maybe you could explain for folks why it's, I know the report asked for 5 years out, but I know in the past we've sort of had questions about, is it possible, especially for students right after graduation or those, related to our prior conversation, completing an industry recognized credential, maybe CTE pathway, is it possible to find out what's happening to them closer in than the 5, I think it's 25, it's actually 7 years out for some kids. So I know that's been a bit of a question. Maybe you could explain that as you're going over the next part.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're able to look at any intervals that are of interest to policymakers, and we're happy to entertain those opportunities. The dashboard sets that we have up look at high school graduation at age 25, their outcomes at age 25. So we look at that cutover from youth to adult. So for our dashboard set, which is separate from this report, it's more comprehensive and has a number of other data points, all of which are about to be expanded to include sector, major, and degree, as well as high school program completion type, right? So USM, CTE flag, those things. But we can look at any points that are of interest. In fact, we do a report for Maryland's community colleges where they're interested in looking at what you might call a value add model. So what were people's wages just before they finished college and what were their wages 3 years later? So we can do all kinds of things with our data that help inform policy, and certainly happy to entertain that and add some things to our queue that would help inform this committee. But here they wanted 5 years. 5 years is what we did. That was what was in the legislation. And we worked with the Governor's Workforce Development Board when this report came out to kind of develop some parameters about how to structure this report. Next slide. So this report is proven to be really kind of interesting for a lot of different reasons. But what you see here in front of you, just to kind of orient you, I pulled not just the data from this year, but which is the far orange column in each of the education buckets, but from the first year of the report, kind of the middle of the report, the green bar in each grouping is what we would call our COVID year, right? The wages hit just as Maryland goes into economic shutdown, right? So I pulled a few data points. And so what we are able to do now with this report, since we are in our 6th reporting year, is kind of look at how these patterns have held for high school graduates over time. And so I have adjusted for inflation on here all of the wages, regardless of the year of the wage, to as if they were fiscal Q2 of 2022. So you can kind of look at apples to apples and see what's been happening. And so what's on the bars are the median quarterly wages for each group 5 years after high school graduation, disaggregated by different types of subsequent educational attainment. And marked against that is what is again in 2022, the living wage for Maryland. These are all quarterly. So for example, the living wage is around $10,000. That's $40,000 a year. When we frame it in this context, we can kind of see 2 interesting patterns. One is individuals with a college degree come close or exceed that living wage 5 years after high school, right? So these are people who are about 22, 23 years old. People who do not Well, you might expect that for people who are still in college, right? They're probably working part-time. People who try college and don't finish actually at this point are performing below individuals who don't try college at all. So if we kind of look at that second grouping of bars, we see individuals for that 5-year period after high school who directly engage in the labor market. We see their wages actually performing better than people who had tried college and not finished. We also see that some of these groups have had some bigger rebounds post-COVID than others. So we've seen both some realized earnings over time, right? The no college group, their median quarterly wages have gone up about $500 a quarter or $2,000 a year. Again, normalizing these to 2022 for inflation adjustment. And we've seen that same kind of bump up happen for associate degrees. They've kind of experienced that wage growth. What was interesting in producing this year's report is, and this is the first time we've seen this happen, the bachelor degree actually did not have that kind of increase. They had a little bit of a decline in terms of their earnings. So some of these entry level either no college groups or people with some lower division credentials have actually experienced some nice wage growth over time. We're still kind of trying to think a little bit about why that's happening and what that really reflects and how much of that is driven by changes in like minimum wage and kind of certain positions increasing wages that maybe were not necessarily needed for the bachelor's degree, but we're able to look over time with this report since we have 6 years of data. The next, if you want to go to the next slide. The other thing I always like to show and talk about is that what we're able to do is look at each individual group and understand how many of these people we find in the labor market at this point. So the UI unemployment insurance wage data that we have some limitations to them, and that if you happen to be working out of state, if you're in a contractual position, if you work for the federal government, those wage data are not in our system. So we're not able to tell you things about some of those individuals. But we can focus on the people that we do find actively engaged in the labor market. And so that's what the base of this report is. And we can see that there's quite a bit of variation amongst those groups. So we find really the highest, most visible group are associate degrees. People who get their associate degrees in Maryland, stay in Maryland and remain highly engaged in the labor market. People with no college and some college, we find about half of. Bachelor degrees, and this is where I like to put some caution on. Bachelor degrees, we find about a third of them time over time here in the labor market. I don't think that this means there's not a market for bachelor degree earners in Maryland. Instead, remember that this is 5 years out. We freeze educational attainment at 4.5 years. The bachelor degree people have only had 6 months to find work after their degree. So we think that this is a little bit more of a reflection of the lag, right, and the bumping right up against the 5-year period, rather than the fact that Maryland does not offer bachelor degree employment in the state. We think if this timeline was expanded, which is part of why we've done our dashboards the way we've done to look at age 25 for degree attainment, we're going to get a more comprehensive picture of labor market engagement. We can also see kind of uniformly the green bar again represents that COVID year. And so we can kind of see how the labor market wage visibility dropped to around 17% for most of these groups in that early COVID timeframe, and has more or less rebounded, not fully rebounded relative to where we were pre-COVID, but has come back fairly close. Next slide. The report also focuses on looking at the wages by labor sector. And so again, we know the sector of the work, we don't know the job. So where you were talking about occupational codes, I don't know jobs people are doing, right? So accountants, they're in every single one of these industries, right? Tech support, they're in every single one of these industries. So these are overall wages, median quarterly wages by labor sector of the employer. And it's again a really telling picture, regardless of the job you may be doing. Collectively, some of these labor sectors are really pushing high school graduates 5 years out well into and above the living wage necessary for the state of Maryland overall, while as others, particularly in leisure and hospitality, or some of our service industries, or even some in healthcare and social assistance, are really falling behind. So the students that are concentrated in those industries have living wage shortfalls each year in the thousands of dollars per quarter, which can translate to $8,000 or $10,000 a year of a shortfall for actually being able to sustain living in Maryland. Next slide. And so, as promised a few years ago, we were asked to take a look at high school graduates that did not go to college to see whether or not their outcomes varied if they had completed career and technical education while they were in high school. And so indeed, we do see a little bit of difference here is, again, median quarterly wages. What we find is that for the high school graduates who did not go on to college in that 5-year period, their wages are about $900 to $1,000 a quarter, right, or about $4,000 a year, higher than high school graduates that did not complete some form of CTE education, again, at that 5-year out period. We also find them more visible in or have a higher percent above the living wage. So one of the other data points on here is not just that the median quarterly wage is around $7,000, but for students who meet this data definition, high school graduates, no college, CTE and education, over 40% of them actually have a wage above the living wage. So despite the low median, there is quite a range of wages that are experienced by this group. Next slide. And again, these variations also kind of hold for this group within labor sector. So we do see those who completed CTE education of some form that did not go on to high school, their median quarterly wages within the labor sector are higher overall than other high school completion types. And looking across the totals, for example, those who completed their high school graduation by fulfilling the USM graduation requirements only have a median above the living wage in 3 sectors versus CTE, which is in 4. But even with that, the wages are quite a bit higher in that CTE group. Next slide. So that is just a brief overview of our Career Preparation Expansion Act report and some of the data contained within the center that we are excited to partner with you on to help provide information you need in your work. Happy to take any questions, and our Executive Director, Ross Goldstein, is also here to answer questions as well.
Please.
Oh, man, thanks so much. This is fantastic data. Just a quick question. Are you able, or do you have it by maybe region or even by county about where it might be concentrated? I think that would be some really, really valuable information.
Yes.
We've done a region and county and
yeah. So we've done a little of that. What I would direct you to is our dashboards. Our dashboards look at high school graduate, college going patterns and degree attainment and wages at age 25, and it disaggregates by county and actually the high school. So the information is very comprehensive. It's disaggregated by race, gender, ethnicity, and economic status as well. So our dashboards are incredibly robust and start with 07, 08, so you can go back even farther.
wow.
Would you be able to,
Yeah, Jim and them work with that or use their data.
would you be able to do this for the apprenticeships?
We've done it for the apprenticeships. We've done 2 versions of the reports that we provide to Chris McLaren each year. We have one up on our website at the moment. We have a second one that we're about to post. He has the data for the second one. I have not had time to get the second one up.
So we can get that report and send it out to everyone as well, right?
Yes, any other committee members have questions about, as we think about, I know the committee staff have been working with and folks to really think about what is the data that we need to track to measure the impact of increasing partnerships and IRCs, you know, how do we make sure we're measuring the right things? Any input or feedback from other members?
And could you, this is Emily Dow with the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Can you just, since this is so much about CTE, can you clarify the CTE flag that you are using in the MSDE file and what that means? Because I think that would be helpful for this group to understand how important students who are participating in a CTE program, how that data eventually makes it to the MLBS.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. The data that we have let us identify completers from concentrators from course takers, right? So some people start CTE and don't finish. So we could identify individual course takers who don't meet the concentration definition, and we can separate concentrators from full completers, those who completed the full sequence. Those data don't go back quite as far. I mean, I think about 2014 or 2015 is when that flag kicks in, where we're able to distinguish between those. And we have the classification of instructional program, or SIP code, so we know which program they completed.
Any other questions or comments on this? Yes.
Yeah, I think it might be kind of a final one, but I think, you know, from what I'm hearing, I think as a next step, I'd like to propose that the CTE committee staff work with Ann and her team after this report is released, just kind of given timing with transition to quite get as much of a chance to dig in on some potential additional metrics, but would love to think about, as we do future reports, what can we be kind of putting together that so there's a comprehensive place to look at this information each year. Like you said, share exactly what we need to measure the outcomes that we're going for. So I think the next step we can start to put that back together, perhaps bring it to our first quarterly meeting in 2024.
I think that's a fine idea. Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, Ann and Ross. Really appreciate your partnership in this work.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next piece that we want to talk about is this collaboration between MSDE and the CTE committee to really make sure that CTE programs are aligned with the state's economic development workforce goals, and that we're leveraging national and global best practices, really ensuring that our students succeed, right? Part of, you recall, in our last meeting, we approved an MOU between MSDE and the CTE committee to work collaboratively on this plan for the Perkins Act. So really ensuring that we leverage Perkins to help achieve our blueprint goals where appropriate. So one of the pieces of that work is to define what is an industry recognized credential. That the notion of that is something that MSDE needs, right? And as the CTE committee, we are responsible for defining that as well. And so we want to have a shared common definition. And so MSDE and CTE committee staff have been working on researching what are best practices in other states, how have other folks thought about defining industry recognized credentials, looking at how we kind of historically, how have we been determining what gets approved and what doesn't, and have developed a proposed framework here. Definition, it's pretty long to be a definition, but I would call it more of a framework for how we think about what an industry recognized credential is. And so I'll turn it over. I believe Molly and Richard are gonna walk through this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Myra, and Molly Masnard, Deputy Director of the CTE Committee. So as Myra touched on, you know, we've been really working closely with Richard Kincaid at MSDE on, you know, defining these industry recognized credentials. Next slide. So part of the requirement is, you know, as part of the blueprint for the 45% goal is defining, you know, what is the criteria and process for which industry recognized credentials would be recognized as part of the 45% goal. And, you know, I'll just add to this that really it's about aligning, you know, the intent of the blueprint. These are supposed to be valuable credentials. They can't just lead to nothing or be something that no one has heard about. And, in working with Richard and his team, and I'll let him jump in a second, but, I think from the beginning, Richard, you've been pretty forthcoming that, MSTE had a lengthy list that also included TSA, technical skills assessments. And, part of our work together, both on Perkins and Blueprint and aligning the state goals, federal goals and so forth, are, how do we ensure that we are looking at industry recognized credentials, collaboratively with the same lens, and most importantly, making sure that what MSDE is recognizing as an industry recognized credential also matches what the Blueprint is going to be counting at the 45% goal. So Richard, I don't know if you want to touch at all on that, but I'll open it up to you.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. And hi, everyone. Greetings from Phoenix, Arizona. Hopefully you can hear me okay and the internet isn't too patchy. But yeah, we have been working pretty diligently with Molly and crew just to really be intentional about the industry credentials that are being offered across the state. And we know that it's time for an overhaul. And I think there's broad agreement that, the current system is far more robust than it probably needs to be. But through this process, also, taking that measured response that I was so thankful to hear Myra talk about just a moment ago, where we need to make sure that, we're intentional about the path forward, and we're looking at student outcomes and employment outcomes and having a good balance between those two things, because we know that those are critical as we're moving through the process. And so really the intentionality around the definition that we shared with you all, or Molly shared with you all earlier in the week, and the one that is about to be shown through the slides, hopefully, reaches that goal. And certainly with your input and commentary, I think that we'll definitely get to a place where we can feel really good about the system. So, next slide. Yep. So in order to do a lot of that work, we wanted to make sure that the decisions that we were making were in line with sort of how best practices had rolled out previously around the country. And so to Secretary Wu's point around IT, there are a lot of definitions around industry recognized credentials that were fully vetted and fleshed out. A lot in CTE programming back in 2018 when Perkins 5 sort of reinvigorated the system. But even before that, there were a number of states that tackled industry recognized credentials in the alignment to workforce, a decade ago. And so there's a lot of lessons learned that we can take and a lot of best practices that we can use to leverage moving forward. And these are the states that really percolated to the top. And really, these states came from two different angles. First, some work that the Governor's Workforce Development Board had initiated earlier in the summer or late spring, centered around a number of states and their practices. And then MSDE reached out to a number of states as well that are considered high flyers in this particular space. And these are the states, on the screen that we consulted. The ones that are in blue were the ones that we leaned into because it seemed as though their processes were really well fleshed out. Their definition had been tried and true over time, and the system was moving towards the same sort of objectives and goals that I think we're wanting and expecting here in Maryland. And so Delaware, Florida, and Texas were really the states that we leaned into. And as we move through our definition and then some of the criteria that we've put together around that definition, those are heavily influenced by these other states. Next slide, please. I do also want to highlight that we're taking a phased approach to the work. We know that Rome wasn't built in a day. And as we're rolling out a new industry recognized credential definition and processes, school still happens every day, right? And so the old system has to be taught out, new system has to be taught in. There's a transition period. And along that transition is where through feedback, we're able to make sure that all of the objectives and outcomes that we need to have happen are actually happening. But also it gives us the opportunity to double down on a particular practice or to change course because it's not having the intended effect. And so, we're at the very beginning of this process. We're defining the terms and, getting feedback from a broad group of stakeholders is absolutely critical. And so last week, Molly and I presented the definition and sort of the thinking around the various criteria to our LEA partners to get their feedback. Like, how would this work in real life? Like, what sort of challenges or opportunities do you see? And gave them an opportunity for feedback. And I think in the email that was sent to committee members earlier in the week by Molly, a summary of that feedback was included so that you're able to see specific feedback related to the terms, and then also some just to highlight, be mindful of as we go through the process, those, that is, live feedback from the field that needs to be considered. And now we're seeking your feedback as well. The next step of this would be to outline the process. So now that we know what IRCs are, how are we going to make sure that we have the right ones in place? And then also, how do we make sure that some of those county or industry specific credentials that John spoke to so eloquently about on the ERT visits, that we're also providing an opportunity for those to be included, maybe at a regional or a micro level rather than a state level. Then, of course, we test the process and then eventually have full implementation once we feel really good about the direction and we know that this is heading us in the direction that we want it to go. The feedback, I can't highlight enough. It's so critical, not only to get you all's feedback as the CTE committee, but also industry and stakeholders, that are hiring students. They need to weigh in on this as well. But our practitioners, the LEA leaders, our teachers, our CTE counselors, career counselor, like everybody in the process needs to be able to provide feedback because these sort of things don't operate in a vacuum. And so this slide really is here to acknowledge and to remind all of the different feedback loops that we need to make sure to include. Next slide, and I'll hand it to Molly.
Great, thank you, Richard. And just to add to that, so basically the intention for today is, to propose this definition and the core characteristics for the CTE committee to consider and adopt. But after this point, that will be pending any feedback that we receive from the public, from the stakeholders that we're engaging with, that may, lead to modifications of that. So there will be sort of a final product at the end of all of this. But we do need to sort of start somewhere, get a process together, especially for our LEAs, because they really need to know what industry's credentials count. So again, we looked at multiple state practices, best practices across the nation, and then we tried to take, what did we love from that, and then also align that to what the intention of the blueprint is. And so that is how this definition came to be. And as much as I hate reading from a slide, I do think it's important, for everyone to kind of just digest, what this definition is. And to Myra's point, yes, maybe it's a framework, a little lengthy. We got, 3 sentences in there, but, we were trying to make sure we captured the key pieces there. So just bear with me. So an industry recognized credential is a formal validation of an individual's skills and competencies that aligns with the state's in-demand occupations and is recognized by industry and employers. It includes a certification, license, or other credential, and is obtained through an assessment process, may be stackable and portable within the industry, and leads to documented positive employment and wage outcomes. The credential ensures relevance to the labor market and supports career advancement and economic development. So I'm going to move to the next slide and have Richard kind of take us through. Basically, we took this and then kind of broke it out into 10 core characteristics. Now, what ends up being the eventual process may not mean that all 10 have to be checked off the box, right? We may, as a committee, have to come to a decision where what is the right number? Which ones are mandatory that they all have to meet and so forth. So I just want you to keep that in mind, but these are the 10 core characteristics that we broke it down into further.
Hey, Molly, before
Yeah.
we go, just be mindful of time. I just want to raise one point that I know I shared with committee staff, but I'd like the other members of the committee to weigh in on. To me, when I read this definition, the most important phrase in this definition is leads to documented positive employment and wage outcomes. And that's number 10 in the set of core elements. This is one person's view, but I would like for others to weigh in on this. In my view, if a credential does not have that, it doesn't matter to me whether it's portable, stackable, blah, 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 because there's like, that is the ultimate outcome. I guess my concern is like, if we're not really clear that there's that's a must have, and then these other things may be must haves too. But I'm just suggesting, like, is that not the outcome that we're looking?
And I absolutely love that you went there, Myra, because this is something that Rachel and Molly and I have been going back and forth on too. You know, coming from MSDE, like we've, never run away from something that we love to assess, right? And so, thinking about that list of 10 criteria, which begin on the next slide, please. These are not in rank order, right? They're in numerical order, no preference, of one higher than another at this point. But as we move into the process stage, that's where we really start talking about how do we assess industry credentials based on that definition and these proposed core elements. And so to your point, I don't know if that means that in order to meet, there are several of these core elements that have to be, and then the others are sort of nice to haves. I don't know if there's a threshold of, 70% or 7 of these have to be met. I also don't know if maybe we, assess this on a rubric where it's a scale of quality rather than just a checklist of it being present or not. I think there's a lot of conversations that are going to come about in the next phase. Once we are able to define sort of what IRCs are, then the real work begins of, all right, now how do we take this framework and this definition and then put sort of the bright lines of what makes it allowable or not, right? And that's a challenge. It's going to require all of us to come together and figure that piece out. Hope that helps. And I think that was Sarah, not Myra. Sorry.
No, it was Myra. Sorry, I should have said it with me. I apologize.
Got it.
And Richard, I do know because of technical delays, we obviously started a little late, so we might have to kind of quickly get through these next 10. It was all sent to committee members in advance, and we will be posting the slides following this meeting.
Can I just ask before you get into these?
And this is Emily Dow.
Yeah, Emily, thank you. For just the good of the group and knowledge, the one thing that I would want to, again, just share with you all so that you know, our agency, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, is charged with approving private career schools. The definition of a private career school is very specific and is set in statute. It says, and I've been trying to pull it up, but it's something along the lines around ensuring that an individual is able to successfully enter into a career at the entry level. So that is very specific and narrow. The example that I want to give is OSHA. We have entities that want to do OSHA training. That's great. They're not a private career school, but it absolutely meets this definition of industry. I think that's fine. I don't think that those two things need to overlap, but I want to be very clear and say in a public setting that a private career school is a much more narrow part of this, and an industry recognized credential is much broader. And again, I think the agency is fine with that, but want to be very clear about kind of what that means in broader context.
No, I think that's really good context, Emily. And, it certainly leads into that component that John had spoken about of having those sort of more localized or regionalized IRCs. It also speaks to the point that there are some industry credentials that really do need to be targeted at, the 25th percentile of earnings, right? Because we're talking about high school students that aren't typically going into, workforce at that mid-level rate that maybe a, American Job Center or WIOA type, program would be looking at. And so that's, I think, where the stackable component, maybe comes in. I think there's a lot of nuance that needs to happen. But certainly we've heard from our LEA folks that having something like an OSHA, certification, or even, the more advanced, construction side, I think it's the blue card, I think. I'm not entirely sure on the number of hours, but that's important. We've also heard from some of our Eastern Shore employers that say, I need the folks coming into my business to be certified in Excel because it's what we use and our business is dependent on it. And that's not something that's currently on our list, and it certainly wouldn't meet sort of this broader definition. So there's always going to be that nuance, which is why we need to figure out a process for 95% of the credentials, and then also have a process for those that are more regionalized or industry specific. And I think we've taken an initial stab at this. It's for a different meeting. But certainly, putting those sort of options in front of you all to see if sort of those concerns are addressed is going to be really important. With, Molly indicating, the time factor, you have these core elements in front of you, or they're on your email, so I'm not going to read them to you. But ultimately, these 10 proposed core elements really do drive home the nuance that we're looking for within an industry recognized credentials. And these are the 10 sort of items that I would first pose the question, is there something that's missing that needs to be part of this list? Or second, is there something on this list that, needs to be taken off, right? It's not important. And the reason why, we're going to ask you to think through this and provide feedback, outside of this meeting is because this is ultimately what's going to drive that assessment process that we'll talk about, at some point in the future. So we want to make sure that we get these definitions in the framework right.
Great, thank you, Richard. So I'll just quickly go through the proposed timeline. As Richard touched on, we did present this to our community college and LEA CTE directors to get some initial feedback. But after this point, we're going to be opening up for further public feedback, certainly at the LEA level, our local boards, and so forth, and various stakeholder groups. So stay tuned for more information on that. But, basically after this point, if the committee, ratifies this definition at the moment, then basically we will work with MSDE to come up with this interim process for approval. We do need to provide the LEAs, a list of industry recognized credentials that are approved so that they know. I mean, a lot of them are already honestly doing their planning or have already done their planning for next year. So this is of high need to them. And to Richard's point earlier, we're really going to be testing and pressure testing the system. So making sure that we're coming up with guidance for the things that don't fall through here, and so forth. So, but it's going to be, we're going to be moving quickly, as you can see in the timeline. And, basically with the intent that by late spring to kind of have a final definition and a final approval process presented to the committee. And again, throughout this, we'll be opening up to the public for feedback. And Richard, anything else to add on that?
Not on this, but when we are finished with this, I do
Yep.
a quick announcement that I want to make, if that's okay.
Yeah, after the vote or okay.
Nope.
Cool.
Okay, so I just want to this is Myra, Norton. I just want to reiterate, so for the benefit of members of the committee, so that we understand the process.
Yeah.
What we're approving today is basically these components that have been laid out here, but there is an iterative process. So for example, some of my feedback is I think we need to really underscore there have to be outcomes, otherwise, right? So that work is going to be done, and we'll come back to this committee for final approval before is that?
Yes, before it's fully, implemented.
Yeah. So right now we need to give intermediate interim direction to LEAs while we work to flesh out the final version of what the approval process and rubric will be.
Exactly. So basically with this approval, we can kind of take this definition and the core characteristics and then develop the internal process. But throughout this whole process, feedback from committee members and the public will be incorporated in so that there's sort of a final, this is the final definition, this is the final process and so forth. Yeah.
Any committee members have concerns about moving forward in light of that plan? Any discussion of these staff? Okay, if not, can I have a motion to approve the definition and 4 elements as proposed? You lose all the committees. All that.
No, they're there.
Yes, a virtual member. Oh, not as you asked me.
So moved.
Thank you.
And I hate to do this, but I need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, all in favor of moving forward, say aye.
Aye.
Good. Great. Any opposed? Okay, thank you, CTE committee staffs and Richard from STE. Go forth and iterate.
Can I request, just whenever you're ready, collaboration with MHEC to, coordinate and help with this and getting the word out and getting the feedback. We're here to help. We've done it with MSDE on the CCR standards. We're happy to do it in this. I think that is our role. So we stand at the ready to convene and help you gather input and insight.
And I would say, I know we'll work with committee, some of these working groups. There are some of us that really want to be intimately involved as well, and probably other stakeholders. And I know that's a focus of CTE committee staff, really make sure that we incorporate all the stakeholders. So yeah, that's right.
Because I imagine, I'm happy that the community colleges are involved, but I know the public 4 years are gonna want to have their say in all of this as well. So want to make sure that they
Absolutely.
and our private.
They've already mentioned they want their say.
Yes.
Okay, and Richard, did you want to make an announcement about something?
I did. Thank you. I'll go very quickly because I know time is of the essence. So I had mentioned in Arizona, in Phoenix, at the National Association for Career Technical Education National Conference happens every December. About 6,000 CT administrators, counselors, teachers from across the country come together. And this is really a venue for us to collaborate and learn from one another. I'm excited to announce that about 60 CT professionals from the state of Maryland are also here, including my school support team and me. It's a great opportunity for us to just see what best practices are happening from across the country. And so tomorrow night we'll be convening a nice evening get together for all of the Maryland CTE folks. Make sure to take pictures and share that out. But today is especially important because tonight is our National Awards Gala where ACTE recognizes a number of amazing teachers from across the country. And wanted to put on you all's radar that Josie Wolf is one of our CTE teachers from Anne Arundel County. She's at Cat North and is one of our baking and pastry arts instructors. So Josie is up for National New CTE Teacher of the Year, which is really exciting. She's going up against, I think, 4 others. And so send all of your love and thoughts and light and everything around 7:30 this evening when that'll be announced, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for Josie. She's an amazing success story because she's also a Maryland CTE graduate. She was a Skills USA state and national officer when she was a student here in Maryland and is now back teaching in the CTE programs that she was raised with. So really excited about Josie. If you have an opportunity, send her a quick email. It's a pretty amazing honor and we're really proud of her.
That's fabulous. Thank you for sharing. We'll be sending positive vibes out west. Okay, Rachel, anything we need to cover?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I will just briefly say, instead of going too far into it, I think a couple items that we'll follow up with committee members on in short order and notify members of the public for engagement opportunities as appropriate. On a couple items, one is we'll be following up soon with more information on some peer learning and technical assistance opportunities we're exploring with partners, including our partners in local workforce boards with the Maryland Workforce Association around career counseling and kind of the activity taking place there, and around expanding access to apprenticeship. I know that a couple points were made on that earlier in the conversation. So we followed up more as we continue developing plans for those events. And we will also be following up with committee members on next steps around defining high school level of a registered apprenticeship. And hearing feedback from stakeholders already, that really, a big point of feedback we've been hearing is that there actually need to be more voices at the table on this conversation that's taking place. And so that's something we're going to be focusing on in short order. We didn't have enough prepared to share a lot today, but we'll share more very soon. And I think with that, my last thing, the next public quarterly meeting of the Governor's Workforce Development Board, which this committee is part, is next Wednesday, a week from today at 3 p.m. It's being hosted by the Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation. Very grateful to them for hosting us. Encourage anyone here, members of the viewing public, to please attend if you're interested. And there will be some updates from this committee kind of coming out of this meeting back to the board as part of that. So thank you all.
Great. Thank you all for your patience today. I know we have managed through mightily some challenging technical difficulties, and we appreciate your patience and participation today. I need a motion to adjourn the meeting, and then we're out of here. Can I have a motion, please? Come on, someone.
So moved.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.